Hi, I'm Liz Kapko. I'm a content manager with Beyond Type 2. And today I'd like to talk about insulin stigma use in the type 2 community. I have been living with type 2 diabetes since 2014. I was diagnosed almost by accident. I love working out, I always have. And one time I ended up working out so extensively that I passed out and I ended up hitting my head on my dining room table. And so I had to go to the doctor to make sure I didn't have a concussion. And in running, blood work, they realized that I was pre-diabetic. And so at that point, I was put on metformin and told to make lifestyle changes. And I was also recommended to go see a diabetes educator. When I went to go meet with the diabetes educator, she started showing me how to inject insulin, and I was very confused. So I wasn't quite sure why she was showing me how to use insulin because I technically was pre-diabetic. And she told me that no, I was, full blown type 2 diabetes. And it was such a shock that I just started crying. And I felt so bad. I was crying in this lady's office who wasn't really understanding why I was upset. But it's because I found out almost by accident that no one told me that I had progressed to a type 2 diabetes. And so I had done a couple different medications, oral medications. I'd never done any sort of injectable medication. And I did have experience with it though. So I am a first generation Mexican American, and the majority of my family has type 2 diabetes. So I grew up seeing my mom inject insulin before meals, seeing my aunts and uncles taking other medications for it and, talking about their blood sugar levels and testing it. So I knew what diabetes management looked like and how it could vary by each person. I didn't realize until I was diagnosed with diabetes that I had a lot of misconceptions about what diabetes management could look like. So I always thought that using insulin for type 2 diabetes was kind of a last resort, that it was something that you had to do once you got to a point in, the disease progression, and that it was, inevitable. And, everyone gets on insulin at some point because the disease gets worse. And it also meant that you failed. You tried working out, you tried eating healthier, and nothing worked. And so you end up having to be on insulin. And so once I was diagnosed and put on medications, I realized that that's not exactly true at all. You don't have to be put on insulin. Not everyone does get insulin therapy for type 2 diabetes, but it is a tool. It is an option that you can be given, and it's helpful. And so after about 3, 4 years of just taking oral medications, I was finally, told we might need to start you on insulin. My A1C wasn't getting lower. It was roughly stuck around 7. And so my endocrinologist recommended, maybe we should start you on insulin therapy. And my heart sank. I felt so defeated at that point because I had this misconception that, being on insulin equals failure. And I didn't want to be stereotyped as, a lazy person that didn't try and didn't succeed and doesn't take their health seriously, which is a huge stereotype and misconception in the type 2 community, because we do try all these things. I tried working out, I run half marathons, I try to eat healthy, I went vegan, vegetarian, I tried every fad diet out there, and my A1C was still not moving. And so I took a step back and kind of thought about, okay, what does being on insulin actually mean? My background is in biology, so I'm very fortunate to be able to understand how our bodies work, the physiology of insulin in our bodies. And so once I thought of it that way, thought of like our body as, a car. You don't shame a car for needing an oil change, right? You don't shame a car for when it breaks down and needs a new part. But we do that to our bodies because, there's a lot of emotions involved with diabetes management. It's a very personal disease. And so when I thought of it that way, like, okay, my body is either not making enough insulin or the insulin that it makes isn't working well enough. So my body just needs a little help. It needs insulin to function the right way that we need it to. And so I, changed my mindset around what using insulin meant for my body. And if my body needs a little help from the inside, then you do what you got to do. Then let's try this. So I started insulin in January of 2020. And I remember feeling like nervous and embarrassed almost to tell anyone that I was going to start it, because I still had this, feeling that insulin was failure. And so I told my family, and surprisingly, it was almost like a rite of passage, like, oh, welcome, to the insulin team. What kind do you use? How much do you take? When do you take it? It completely changed my diabetes management. Like once I started using insulin, I didn't have these high peaks. I didn't feel tired all the time because of those high peaks. My numbers all looked better. My A1C got better. My time in range looked better. And so who would have thought that giving my body what it needed would help me feel better and physically and health and be healthier. And so I started feeling better. And when I was put on insulin, I was determined. I'm going to do whatever it takes in order to get off of medication. I wanted, that was my goal, was to get off of medication and to be able to manage it through lifestyle intervention. So through exercise and with nutrition. And so I worked really, really hard. I tracked everything that I ate. I made sure to exercise, 5 to 6 times a week, listening to my body, trying to figure out what works for me, because I think that's the absolute hardest thing about living with diabetes, is that what works for one person might not work for you. And that can be very frustrating. So it's all about trial and error, trying to figure out what works for you. And so I found out what works for me. I found out the perfect, blend of medications that helped me feel better, so I could exercise, so I could eat, what I wanted to eat. And a year later, I was taken off of insulin because my numbers all looked great. I didn't need it. I was within range. My, blood sugar levels were pretty steady. And so I was so proud that I was able to get off of insulin. And I kept all my other, medications the same, lifestyle the same. And over time, I noticed my numbers start creeping back up a little. For me, stress really, really impacts my glucose levels. And so I was just, end of 2020, I think we were all really, really stressed at that point. And so I knew that I was going to need a little bit more help to get through this stressful part of my life. And also, I just gotten married. And so we had started thinking, future family planning, what does that look like for someone with type 2 diabetes? And so I also talked to my doctor about, what does that journey look like? What do I need to do to prepare ahead of time? And one of the things was I would not be able to stay on any of my medications. I would have to be put on insulin during pregnancy. And although that's, not anywhere near, we're not ready for that point in our lives yet, but I knew that that was going to eventually happen. And so I actually asked my doctor to put me back on insulin, probably a couple months ago. And I never in my life thought I would do that. I never thought I would want to be on insulin because of these stigmas, because, these misconceptions that means you didn't try hard enough, or, you didn't care about your management. And so when I asked to be put on it, I asked because I had already seen how successful my body performs when it has the tools that it needs, when it has insulin. And I knew that the path that I was on without it at the time, due to stress, due to lifestyle changes, wasn't where I wanted to go. And so I, tried to be proactive and start insulin beforehand. Also, just because I know my body takes a long time to adjust to medication changes. So I knew that whenever the time came and we wanted to start, family planning, I would need to be on insulin anyways. And so I made the decision for my own health to advocate for myself that I wanted to be put on insulin so I could feel better and, manage my diabetes the best that I could. And so having that discussion, um, I felt really empowered. Like I knew what I wanted, I knew what was best for my body. And I worked with my doctor to make sure that we were on the same page, that we were on the same page about our goals and how we were going to achieve them. And so I've been on insulin for long acting insulin for a couple months. And unfortunately, I ended up having some gallbladder issues. And so I just had surgery in May. I don't know what month it is anymore, but in May of 2022, I had my gallbladder removed. And for the most part, I knew about stigmas. I knew about misconceptions through my own personal experience with my family, but also from talking to other members of the type 2 community. And so I had never personally felt attacked or stigmatized or stereotyped until I had my surgery. And so I was laying in the hospital bed, getting ready for surgery, tons of doctors in and out of my room telling me all these things. And, here's what's going to happen. Can you sign this form, sign that form? And I had one of the anestheticians come in, anesthesiologist come in and, went through what the process was to put me on anesthesia. And she asked me like, oh, I see you're on insulin. What type of diabetes do you have? And, I'm trying to wrap my head around everything that's happening. And I'm like, oh, I'm a type 2. And I remember this clear as day. She said, type 2 and insulin? Wow, must be really bad. And I couldn't believe what I had just heard. A doctor telling the patient that, like, it's not something she said in her head. It's not something she said to another doctor. She said it out loud to me, the patient. And I was already nervous. I was, already kind of scared about my first surgery ever, trying to focus on what's happening, how I'm going to feel. And to have that extra layer of stigma happen right there and then was one of the most terrifying, overwhelming, uncomfortable things that's ever happened. And I've been a diabetes advocate for years. And so I know that these are things that happen. These are things that people don't understand if they don't have diabetes, if they're not an endocrinologist, if they don't care for someone with diabetes. And I remember after surgery, I just kept playing that over and over in my head. I can't believe she said that to me. And I was angry that I didn't say something back. I didn't stand up for myself. And of course, I was, nervous about surgery. So it wasn't exactly on the, forefront of my mind. But I wish that I could have gone back and told her, hey, that's actually stereotyping. That's a stigma in the community. You shouldn't say those things. And so I did afterwards reach out to patient care at the hospital to, file a complaint about it, because I know that that's not right. I know that's not true, but I can't imagine how many other patients that doctor might have had that she told that to that didn't know better and stopped using their insulin because of it, because of the shame, because of the embarrassment. I think it's really important that we talk about this and that people in the type 1 community, people who don't have diabetes, doctors that don't interact normally with diabetic patients, people with diabetes, I want them to know that language matters. How you speak to people matters. Bedside manners matter. It can make all the difference. And some of the best doctors I've had on my diabetes care team are the ones that listened to me, that asked me how I was feeling about it, how I felt about my management. The worst ones I've had are the ones that belittled my experience, that decided what was best for me without taking into account what I wanted and what my goals were. And it's hard. Living with diabetes is absolutely hard, regardless of, what type you have. But living with type 2 diabetes is really hard, because not only do we have to manage what goes on with our bodies, we also have to manage how we respond to society and the world telling us what they think about our bodies, what they think we should do with our bodies without them even knowing. that doctor told me that without looking at my medical history, without looking at my, CGM to see what my sugars were, without knowing that I tried working out, I tried, eating healthy, I tried other medications, but being on insulin was what was best for me. And at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for yourself. And so if you've ever struggled with stigma and misconceptions about insulin use it anyways, because people's opinions aren't going to make you healthier. Giving your body what it needs is going to make you healthier. And insulin is just any other medication, any other tool that you need. Nobody shames someone with a broken arm for needing a cast, right? Nobody shames a cancer patient for needing chemotherapy. Nobody shames other people for needing treatments for their disease. So why would you do that about insulin? You shouldn't.